वही लिखा हुआ टी।
हाँ
ओके।
Hello, friends. We welcome my Lord Justice Ravindra Bhatt. Kindly have seat. We also welcome Shri K.K. Rai on the stage, Ranjana on the stage, and Baba. We always call him Baba. I have to recollect Krishnamurti. Come, where is Krishnamurti? Come. Huh? Yeah. We also request Dr. Neerav Bharyok to be on dais, please. I request Ajit Pandey ji to kindly welcome Chief Guest, please. Our SHYAMLHA was very much associated with Sagar Apartment and the welfare in Sagar Apartment. So we have our president from Sagar Apartment, Charanjit ji, former MP. Will request Charanjit ji to kindly welcome Dr. Neerav. यहाँ रख दो बेटे। I request Ajay Agarwal ji to please welcome our most popular, very dear to me, very good qualification. Welcome, Ranjana ji, please. Asha Madan ji to welcome Shri K.K. Rai. आइए आशा जी। Asha has been my batchmate. Sorry, I didn't notice you. Krishnamurti whispered कि वो बैठी हैं। श्री K.K. Rai. आप इधर चेयर पर इधर चेयर। So without wasting much of your time, I quickly move and request Shri K.K. Rai, Senior Advocate. Start. ऐसा भाई आप आइए।
Honorable Mr. Justice Ravindra Bhatt, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to welcome Honorable Mr. Justice Ravindra Bhatt, Judge Supreme Court of India, to deliver a lecture on trailblazer women in law. The later part of 19th century and the earlier phase of 20th century have seen the struggles throughout the world by enslaved nations, marginalized societies, and disadvantaged groups to find their voice and break the shackles impeding their freedom and progress. Women too have struggled to uh, prove themselves in the field of medicine, law, and politics. It is a tribute to these indomitable spirits that we are going to hear from Justice Bhatt on the issue. Mrs. Pappu herself was a trailblazer in the field of law, since she made her mark in the profession when there were very few women lawyers around. Many of them will still struggling to get recognition. She was the first woman to be designated a senior advocate in the whole Commonwealth. She was also member Law Commission of India. In recognition of her contribution to society, she was conferred Padma Shri by Government of India. I was fortunate to have worked under her tutelage. Wherever I am today, I owe a major part of it to her. She not only taught me nuances of law, but also influenced me in shaping my outlook to life. Now, a few words about the foundation started in 2017 in my senior's memory under the guidance of Sri K.K. Venugopal, Attorney General for India. It is the goal of the foundation to spread legal awareness through lectures, seminars, and legal aid. This is the first lecture organized by the Trust. Honorable Mr. Justice Bhatt is most eminently suited to speak on the subject he has chosen. Imbued with the constitutional values, he has always championed the cause of gender justice. His judgments on this issue are trailblazers in their own ways. He has developed jurisprudence on the issue which will contribute in the long run to ensure right to equality in a true sense. While dealing with restrictions on number of female singers, artists on the stage, in recently delivered judgment, Hotel Priya versus State of Maharashtra and others, he declared the same void. He emphasized the duty of the state to create situations conducive to their working, rather than entombing their aspirations. I am tempted to quote para 46 of the judgment, which would lead to women's emancipation further. The justification provided by the respondents to sustain the restriction, insofar as they claim to protect the women, in the opinion of this court, lay it open to the charge of entombing their aspirations. In case there were any real concern for the safety of women, and this is very important, in case there were any real concern for the safety of women, the state is under a duty, as highlighted by Anuj Garg, to create situations conducive to their working, to run that extra mile to facilitate their employment rather than to thwart it and stifle their choice. Such measures which claim protection in reality are destructive of Article 15(3) as they masquerade as special provisions and operate to limit or exclude altogether women's choice of their avocation. This concern of Justice Bhatt is not a recent one. In the beginning of his career as a judge in 2006, in Samriddhi Devi versus Union of India, that was a judgment while he was in Delhi High Court, he recognized the right of a victim of sexual harassment to question the penalty given to the delinquent in this regard. In para 39 of the judgment, he underscored a safe working place for women in the following words. There is no gainsaying the importance of displaying sensitivity while considering appropriate penalty for a proved misconduct of sexual harassment. The measure adopted by the employer has not merely been subjective. Unlike other instances of misconduct, it services a wider purpose of assuring a safe workplace and signals the willingness of the employer to address such issues with seriousness and promptitude. This consideration can never be overlooked in such cases. A reading of the appellate authority's order, however, shows that it considered only the adverse impact of dismissal order upon the fourth respondent. That is no doubt a consideration, but it cannot be the only factor. The impugn order is therefore disproportionate. Even while giving the judgment, he underlined the importance of giving freedom of choice to women to pursue her vocation, to ensure security at the workplace, to see that they contribute to the society the way they want to society. I'm not dealing with his contribution to other areas because here we are dealing with the gender issues. All that I can say is that his vast reading on wider range of issues get reflected in his judgments. We thank him for accepting the invitation to speak on the issue, and I will not be standing between you and the main speaker. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Raisa. Shyamla, as we used to call him, two members of bar, we always say, some junior member, younger member used to say, ये क्या होता है, राम राम करते हो या श्यामला बोलते हो. I love, basically, अब प्रिया को भी प्रिया ही बोलते हैं ना, प्रिया हिंगोरानी जी थोड़ी बोलते हैं. So Shyamla, as we say, was really a champion for social justice. Just few lines what my Lord the Chief Justice of India, as he then was, Justice Khair, while reading reference, wrote for and spoke for Shyamla. Dr. Shyamla Pappu leaves behind a distinguished record of dedicated service to the legal profession and the community at large. She made significant contribution to furtherance of access to justice. As a lawyer, she was deeply committed to the cause of women, children, the poor, and the oppressed. I think these are the golden words. I also wish to read the message of my Lord Justice A.M. Khanwilkar. A doyen of bar, late Padma Shri, Dr. Shyamla Pappu was as good as a lawyer as she was a strong woman. A proponent of human rights, she was the first woman to be designated as senior advocate in the Commonwealth. Guided by the socialist goals exemplified in the directive principle of the state policy, Dr. Shyamla Pappu had a defining impact on the jurisprudence evolved by the Supreme Court in its formative years upon her unfortunate demise. The foundation was established in 2017 by R. Krishnamurthy with a view to carry forward her glorious heritage. I also wish to read few lines. I'm not reading the full context because it would take a lot of time, from His Excellency Jagdeep Dhankar ji, who is also a member of Sagar Apartment Association where he was, and a member of bar, of course. I congratulate the foundation personnel for seeking indulgence of Honorable Justice Ravindra Bhatt to deliver the first lecture. She made many distinctions in her career. First woman to be designated as senior advocate in Commonwealth in 1971 at the young age of 38, a member of Law Commission of India and Padma Shri awardee. She was also a member of Independent Commission on Development and Health in India. Few lines I wish to read from our Attorney General Shri K. Venugopal. I am so happy that R. Krishnamurthy has organized this function in memory of his mother, Shyamla Pappu. I had known Shyamla from the 1960s when I was practicing in Madras and used to come over to Delhi for my cases. Shyamla had a prolific legal career, rising to be one of the foremost lawyers in Supreme Court and Delhi High Court. A search of her name online returns over 100 reported cases, including landmark cases such as Indira Sani versus Union of India, you all know. It was no surprise, therefore, that her name was being mentioned for being elevated to the bench of Supreme Court. If this had happened, she would have been the very first women judge in the Supreme Court. This is Shri K. Venugopal. Friends, we also acknowledge with great honor the presence of Special Judge Shri S.S. Rathi, and I request Priya ji to kindly present a bouquet to Shri Rathi ji, please. हाँ वो that is what I am saying. ये तो श्यामला की मैसेज में तो इनफॉर्मल होनी ही चाहिए. श्यामला की मैसेज में आप फॉर्मेलिटी कर भी नहीं सकते. Friends, before I invite the star of the day, Honorable Justice Ravindra Bhatt, I must say, and I wish to share a little bit about Justice Bhatt. You all know Rai Sahab has read a lot. I am on a little different point. my mind, this is my view, and I hope, I'm sure most of us would agree. He's a very saintly judge. When I say saintly, see now this smile and whispering tells me that yes, saintly is not properly explained in the word, not understood in the word. Saint is not one who is only wearing saffron clothes, no. Saint is one साधु सोए जानिए चले साधु की चाल परमारथ राता रहे बोले वचन रसाल. This is sadhu who thinks good of everybody. That's all. No ritual is required, as Kabir says. चाह गई चिंता मिटी मनवा बेपरवाह और जाको कछु ना चाहिए वो शाहों के शाह. ये शाहों के शाह means he is the greatest. One who doesn't need anything for. I distinctly remember, not that all bar, all India used to talk. Justice Bhatt and Justice Muralidhar, they were the pioneers. When we are talking of pioneers in women and law, we must talk of pioneers in judiciary also. They were the pioneers who said, "Board laga hua tha, don't address us as my lord. You can say sir. You can." So that's why I say somebody who thinks good of everybody, who is all the time thinking of others. He is a real saint and very strong. You have seen him. I mean, if today he is smiling with you, tomorrow you may say, "What are you talking?" No. So very firm. That's why I said. And one question which always disturbs me, and I think it is question for all of us. When we celebrated Bhagat Singh's sacrifice day or Shahidi Divas. We used to say, why? How come there are no Bhagat Singhs after 31? 31, he said so many things. So similarly, 71, imagine. Sir, I'm sure that you will cover all these subjects. But one thing which disturbs when we say that women is the strength in all our religion, whether it is Hindu, we say usko nahi dekha humne kabhi, par uski zarurat kya hogi? ऐ माँ तेरी सूरत से अलग भगवान की सूरत क्या होगी? We all honor women. Jesus chose to be born through Maria, not John. Guru Nanak Dev Ji went a step ahead. He said the society which does not respect women would not survive. Would not survive. So therefore I am requesting my Lord Justice Bhatt to kindly also guide us and tell us why in 71 Shyamla was our leader. And today after 50 years we don't see too many Shyamlas. That is what disturbs us. We don't see too many. There are few, of course. Few exceptions. Yeah, few exceptions. So 5, 7, 10 गिनेंगे ना. 5, 7, 10 गिनेंगे. And we have 50 crore. Or say 132 का 60 crore women. Why only few handful? So sir, I request you to kindly address us and guide us. And as I said, you are the real saint. You can guide us how to go about it, how to produce and imbibe more and more Shyamlas in society. Thank you very much. I request Justice Bhatt to kindly say a few words. No problem.
A very good evening to all of you. Mr. Krishnamurti, Baba, if I'm at so I say, where is he? Yeah, there he is. My dear friend Kameshwar, although I'll have to call him Mr. K.K. Rai here. Ranjana ji, Ashok Arora, who did me the honor of calling me a saint, which I will hope to disabuse you. I am no more and no less than a human being than all of you. Miss Neera Bhariok and my dear friends. As usual, when I come here and see so many friends, actually fellow travelers, when I saw Asha, when I saw Kameshwar, and many of you, I was just thrown back to 40 years ago when we started as struggling lawyers. Ashokji was also there. And I think delighting in getting those small briefs for 300 or 400 rupees where we were appearing for workers. So I think I mean, that it's very heartening that there are some people, but I know that catchment is a vanishing tribe. I can see the smiles on the people's eyes. But then I can't but help share that this kind of nostalgia overtakes me when I see my old friends. I'm actually taken back to 40 years back when I just joined the bar, and the specific bar which late Shyamla ji was part of. It is a pleasure to be addressing you today on this topic that is rather dear to my heart. The recollection of Indian legal history mirrors the male-dominated, colonially rooted, and strong casteist backdrop of our legal system. While not a justification, it does explain why unquestionably remarkable trailblazing women, a few of which I wish to speak about on, have been forgotten or rendered invisible when chronicling legal history. Having been invited by Mr. Krishnamurthy to deliver this lecture organized by the SHYAMLHA PAPPU Foundation, which is in honor of his mother, who was an indomitable force at the bar, I thought this topic would be apt for this occasion. Designated at the record young age of 38 years, Shyamla ji was an extremely gifted speaker, one who could sway judges with her oratory skills, supported by rigorous understanding of the law. Deeply influenced by the independence movement, she began her illustrious career as a lawyer for the working class and went on later to represent litigants in a variety of women's issues. This brought her in close association with several NGOs to whom she continued to provide legal services. But her contributions cannot be limited to just this, that is, having been a senior lawyer in the formative years of the Supreme Court. Her participation in many matters have definitely contributed to its early jurisprudence. Her enduring emphasis on directive principles of state policy and their importance deserves special mention. A little known fact about her is that outside of the courtroom, where she displayed her oratory skills, she was an extremely talented singer. And I remember she used to send invites to me religiously on certain occasions. But regrettably, I was not able to attend any of them. My first interaction with Ms. Pappu was in January 1981, when I was asked to present myself before the ASR Memorial Charitable Trust. You know about that, which used to confer a kind of annual award to legal scholars. Having been chosen, I went to the office of the trust where Ms. Pappu interviewed me. I do not recollect anything about what she asked me, but what stuck with me was that she was extremely kind. A year or so later, when I entered the legal profession, she was the only woman senior advocate at the bar for quite a while. Once she came to know that I had some connection with Karnataka, she always claimed that affinity with me and often used to speak with me in my language. This lecture today is my attempt to draw attention to some of these incredible women who have shaped the law and its making and remind us of their immense contribution. This is with the hope that it will inspire you to all read more about them and bring their stories to the mainstream where they rightfully belong. To start off, I'll begin from the late 1940s, the Constituent Assembly debates, and in the second half, speak briefly about some women lawyers who, despite revolutionizing the legal profession and even the judiciary, do not occupy the space they deserve in our conventional knowledge currently. The first, Constituent Assembly members. Only 15 members were part of our male-dominated Constituent Assembly. The efforts and contributions of these women has been overshadowed, often forgotten, while talking about the constitution-making process. You can see them in this slide. This is further complicated by the lens of caste, region, and economic class. Today, I wish to speak briefly on a few of them to showcase the important cross-section that they represented, the essence of their struggles, the dissents made by them, and consequently its results, which have had an enduring effect in shaping our constitution. I'll start with Dr. Durgabai Deshmukh. You can see her in this slide. She was a fierce rebel. She refused to accept societal limitations imposed on her, choosing to always take matters in her own hands. When she was 8 years old, she was married off to a man much senior to her in age. Within a few years, she had not only convinced her family to allow her to break away from the union, but also restarted her education. A few years later, while applying for an MA in political science, the Andhra University regretted its inability to grant her admission as there was no women's hostel. Durgabai promptly put in an advertisement in the local newspaper, rallied a few women, and started her own hostel. The result was a first-class degree with the prestigious Tata Scholarship to study at London School of Economics. Her spirit of fighting against all odds to do the right thing combined her with dedication to social upliftment gave her the title of Mother of Social Work by Indira Gandhi. She had the distinction of being the only woman member of the Constituent Assembly's panel of chairmen and the Select Committee on the Finance Bill. Through her participation in the Assembly debate, she reportedly moved 750 amendments. She was also inducted into the Central Social Welfare Board of the Planning Commission. For her rich contribution to social work, she was awarded the Padma Vibhushan in 1975. Today, I would like to draw attention to three areas in which she worked tirelessly for the upliftment of women and children. First, being the historic abolishment of the Devadasi culture in Madras by way of legislation. Second, her pioneering work in establishing the Andhra Mahila Sabha. And third, her insightful observations in the Constituent Assembly debates and how relevant they are even today. The first is the abolishment of the Devadasi culture. The Devadasi culture involved dedication of young prepubescent girls considered to be pure before the onset of menstruation to temples as the idols' wives. Such girls were not allowed to marry and were not compensated for their services. Durgabai knew from a very young age that the Devadasi culture was fundamentally a tool to suppress the autonomy and of women and subjected them to a life of servitude and prostitution, masking as an important tradition for centuries. When she was 12 years old, she rallied the Devadasis of her village in Kakinada in Andhra Pradesh to meet Mahatma Gandhi. When the organizers of Gandhiji's tour placed an unreasonable demand of rupees 5,000 those days as a condition precedent, a huge sum in 1921, she persevered and raised the funds to grant the Devadasis an audience. Durgabai was spurred further in her mission by meeting her idol, the social reformer Dr. Muthulakshmi Reddy, and assisted her in abolishing this social evil by way of the Madras Devadasi Prevention of Dedication Act, which was passed in 1947. The second is the Andhra Mahila Sabha. A true Gandhian, Durgabai quickly mastered the Hindi language in 1921 in order to teach it to volunteers of the Indian National Congress in Kakinada. What began as sporadic lessons quickly transformed into a full-fledged school for girls called Balika Hindi Pathshala. This slowly expanded to setting up of several other institutions for women such as Mahila Vidyalaya, the foundation stone for which was laid by Gandhiji. Collectively, these institutions on education, healthcare, and housing for women came to be known as Andhra Mahila Sabha. Today, it has developed into one of India's largest charitable organizations, doing tremendous good for social benefit. So powerful was her influence that it gave women confidence to emulate her actions. At the age of 15, Durgabai's father passed away, and this is a very interesting anecdote. The prevailing custom was for the widow to shave her head. Durgabai's relations, who had come to pay condolences, pressurized her mother to observe this custom. Yet again, in a display of fiery defiance, Durgabai recalls the experience thus. I protested against this and told them that if they persisted in their demand, they had better get out of the house. My mother had lovely long hair. She was good looking. I requested her to resist the demand, and finally, she did not yield to the pressure. Since then, I found her example being emulated in several families in the neighborhood. Her generosity extended to all, even transcending what would have otherwise been uncomfortable relationships. When her erstwhile husband passed away, leaving her behind as a widow, she took it upon herself to make herself self-sufficient by providing her an education and vocational skills in Andhra Mahila Sabha. Durgabai had an indomitable spirit, and she continued her efforts even when she faced the threat of physical violence. She approached the employers of several wife beaters in the area and implored them not to continue the services of those men. The most important part is the Constituent Assembly debates. Having been a freedom fighter, actively rallying women satyagrahis and participating in the Salt Satyagraha and the civil disobedience movement, Durgabai's contributions in the Constituent Assembly debates were insightful as they proposed to correct many societal ills she had spent her whole life battling, from jail reforms to utilization of taxes for social welfare. One such debate was on having a clear provision in the concurrent list of the draft constitution for the protection of children and youth from exploitation and abandonment. The draft constitution of 1948 envisaged the same as a fundamental duty under draft Article 31, thus not making it legally enforceable. To this, she said, unless the state undertakes a direct responsibility, there will be no good. It is open to the state to come forward and make some subsidy or give some donation or some contribution to an association, either started by a private enterprise or by a philanthropist for the protection of infants. We know how these associations are struggling for their daily existence, and for lack of funds, they're not able to get on well. And in this manner, these poor homes would no longer serve the cause of poor children. I do not know what kind of help they will get if the state does not take direct responsibility. This is not a matter which could be left to private enterprise, but the state must take direct responsibility. There is no good in our stating the directive principles, which will remain as pious declarations unless given effect to by the state. This reasoning remains relevant even today. While we have come a long way since ensuring that our children are provided essentials such as a matter of right and not charity, very often the infrastructure and development of systems that support these children are unable to do so due to lack of funds. It then becomes crucial for the state as guardian of the children to step in. In her autobiography, Chintaman and I, which is a delightful book about her life and marriage with Sir Chintaman Dwarkanath Deshmukh, independent India's first governor of RBI and subsequent Union Finance Minister, Durgabai presents her most human side. She provides a glimpse of some of her insecurities. One would think that such an accomplished person would have none, and how she overcame them. One such which one is surprised to read about was the unevenness of her marriage with Sir Deshmukh. She was made to feel that her lack of finesse would render her an unsuitable partner for her husband. She recalled that when Chintaman and I were married in 1953, many friends and relations remarked on the difference in our habits and ways of life. They compared the blunt and outspoken Durgabai with the suave and westernized C.D. Deshmukh. How they wondered, would I, who had no social graces nor cared for them, get along with Chintaman, was the very embodiment of style and grace. In her usual disarming nature, she broke down these foolish prejudices. Her great reputation meant that she made acquaintances far and wide, even within the legal circles. In fact, you would be astonished to learn that we have Durgabai to thank for initially scaling up our Supreme Court library. The Chief Justice Kania had especially requested her to speak the then Deputy PM Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel to increase the budget allocated from 50,000 rupees to 1 lakh rupees in 1950. The second person I will come to is Dakshayani Velayudan. Even amongst the 15 elected women in the assembly, only one Dalit woman was elected, which is Dakshayani Velayudan, a fascinating woman with remarkable lived history. Not that she had needs any validation of any kind, but she enjoyed the admiration of 14 other female members who are no doubt upper caste, privileged and Western educated, for her intellectual interventions against social injustice and dedication towards inclusive governance in the assembly debates. Given that she challenged the existing caste hegemony in numerous ways, it is more than fitting that she was named Dakshayani, which is another name for goddess Parvati, believed to be reserved for the upper castes. Her list of firsts is lengthy, and each entry more impressive than the last. She was the first Dalit girl to attend school wearing an upper cloth, the first Dalit woman to graduate college in India. As science graduate, she was a nominated member of the Cochin Legislative Council and subsequently the Constituent Assembly of India. But in addition to these, what seemed like simple actions were deeply symbolic in questioning these hierarchies. For instance, she was known to neither walk with shoulders bent when she was a child, perhaps, as was expected of Dalits, nor make way for upper castes while walking on the road. A staunch follower of Gandhiji, she strongly opposed untouchability, but believed that as long as it was practiced, the word Harijan, which was popularized by Gandhiji, would remain irrelevant. In the Constituent Assembly, she asserted that the best way to address it was through sustained state propaganda and not through punishment. Refuting the notion of the Dalits being a minority community, she was of the view that the Harijans are Indians and they have to live in India as Indians and they will live in India as Indians. Decentralization is the dominant and perhaps the most impactful theme that one can find in her contribution in the debates. Her firm belief was that the constitution ought to be kept free from any form of centralization of authority. And there are two ways of making India a strong unit, one by the method of centralization of power and the other by decentralization. But centralization is possible only through parliamentary system, which now goes under the safe words democratic methods. She was also against the formation of centrally administered areas under the new constitution because she was of the view that the British kept these areas simply to have military rule in the country. Her undying faith in inclusive governance is expressed in her campaigning for the spirit of freedom, equality, and protection of rights as enshrined in the Constitution. During the debate on the objectives resolution, Dakshayani's stand ran strong. She staunchly expressed that communalism was antithetical to nationalism. Further, she believed that the emancipation of Harijans depended on adopting a set of moral safeguards and they would be free only in a socialist republic. Attacking the separatist tendencies which were prevalent during the time, she emphatically expressed her conviction that the Indian Republic there will be barriers based on caste and community, but appealed to the Harijan delegates of the Constituent Assembly not to harp upon separatism as it would render the assembly a laughing stock for future generations. While discussions were going on, the report on minority rights, she was against any separate electorates or reservations for reservations and in any place whatsoever, which is reflected in her words while delivering her speech, which is that it is just because of British imperialism that has left marks on us, and we are always feeling afraid of one another, so we cannot do away with separate electorates. This joint electorate and reservation of seats is also a kind of separate electorates. And the way Harijans could do better was by joining with the majority community and not depending on the votes of their own community. This was expressed on the occasion of the election of the advisory committee wherein she articulated that Harijans also belong to the Hindu fold and have every right to represent Hindus in Muslim provinces. She strenuously supported the fundamental right pertaining to freedom from forced labor, and in the assembly asserted that this freedom would bring about economic revolution in the fascist social structure existing in India. While some of our views have aged differently and may be articulated differently in present times, one of our takeaways, one of the takeaways that I hope you will have, is a firm view that our constitution is people-centric. She had said the working of the constitution will depend upon how the people will conduct themselves in the future, not on the actual execution of the law, which is a statement that runs true today more than ever. The third person I'll speak about is Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, perhaps the most well-known among these. She had inherited much of her nationalist fervor from her father, who belonged to a royal family. Her interest in politics was aroused due to the frequent visits to her father's house of many stalwarts of the freedom movement, particularly Gopal Krishna Gokhale. It was Gokhale perhaps who left a deep impression on the young mind of Rajkumari. It is evident from her own acknowledgement, as she had once said, that the flames of my passionate desire to set India free from foreign domination were fanned by him. After joining public life, she took an active part in the SALT campaign and was arrested. A true patriot, she condemned the communal award given by Ramsay MacDonald when he was the Prime Minister in 1932 regarding the political rights of major and minor communities in India. Rajkumari Amrit Kaur came under the influence of Mahatma Gandhiji early in her life during the days of martial law in 1919, soon after the Jallianwala Bagh tragedy, and became one of his closest disciples. She threw herself into the movements aimed at the emancipation of women in general and Harijans of Shimla in particular. A silver-tongued orator of high order, she delivered a number of political speeches at various platforms espousing the philosophy of Gandhiji. Finally, in 1934, after always having been considered too attached to the material aspects of life, she succeeded in shedding that perception and joining Gandhiji's Sevagram ashram. Subsequently, for 16 years, she worked as his secretary. During this time, she campaigned for opening of more girls' schools and abolition of child marriage and polygamy. As a member of the assembly, she made important contributions through her speeches and debates and was selected as a member of several committees, including the Subcommittee on Fundamental Rights, Minority Rights, Finance Rights, and so on and so forth. She is perhaps best known for revolutionizing the Indian public health sector. After independence, the Prime Minister Nehru invited her to become a member of his Council of Ministers. She thus acquired the distinction of being the first woman member of the Indian cabinet after independence and held the portfolio of health from 1947 to 1950 and again for 7 years from 1950 to 57. As Minister of Health, she worked earnestly and with all zest and devotion for the betterment of the health of the people. It was as a result of her dedicated efforts that the All India Institute of Medical Sciences came into existence. While piloting the AIMS bill in 1956, she said, "It has been one of my cherished dreams that for postgraduate study and for the maintenance of high standards of medical education in our country, we should have an institute of this nature in India, which would enable our young men and women to have their backgrounds with the necessary experience that we would like to have of work in villages and impetus that would like to give to them to do research in various spheres of medical education. This is a pure, honest attempt to bring to this country good standards of medical education." In 1954, additionally, Amrit Kaur set up a committee to study all aspects of nursing service and education. In a speech made on the Indian Nursing Council Amendment Bill, she said in 1957 November, "The question of status of the nursing profession and the question of giving gazetted status to nurses occupying high offices in the state is something for which I worked very hard. Maintenance of a higher standard of nursing is very necessary." There are several other path-breaking achievements to her credit, but I have chosen to highlight these. The other person whom I'll speak about was a member of the Constituent Assembly you might have heard of is Hansa Mehta. Amrit Kaur's vision for empowerment of women in India was shared by many, including the powerhouse Hansa Mehta, who was introduced to the Indian freedom struggle by Sarojini Naidu in 1920. Like Amrit Kaur, she also led the All India Women's Conference as president in 1949. If I am not mistaken, Shyamla ji was also a president at some time.
Yeah, of the Andhra Vanita Mandali.
Yeah. No, even the All India Women's Council.
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, Durga Bai Deshmukh and they were the ones who set up.
Yes.
I was the Mandali of those days.
She joined Rajkumari as a member of the Advisory Committee, Subcommittee on Fundamental Rights, and Provincial Constitution Committee. She also served as a member of the UN Subcommittee on the Status of Women and was Vice Chair with the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, in a United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights Committee. Her efforts in the UNHRC led to the successful change in the text of Article 1, which had originally read, "All men are born equal and free and equal," echoing the American Constitution. At her insistence, it was changed to, "All human beings are born free and equal." Now, this is a contribution we must all celebrate. While the draft of Article 15 of the Indian Constitution was being debated in the Advisory Committee, a problem arose as to the framing of the article in such a manner which would provide for non-discrimination of citizens while simultaneously also giving separate rights to women and children. Some of the male members of the assembly were not in favor of making special provisions for women, contesting it to be a discrimination against them. Several objections were raised, but Hansa Mehta and Amrit Kaur were firm in their objection of not excluding the words sex from clause 2 of Article 15. As a result of this dissent, a proviso was added when it was stated, "Nothing contained in this clause shall prevent separate provision being made for women and children," which is today's Article 15(3). Both Hansa Mehta and Amrit Kaur objected to the draft of Article 25 on the ground that several customs such as parda, child marriage, polygamy, unequal laws of inheritance, prevention of intercaste marriages, etc., would subsist. They argued that no clause in the fundamental right should make it impossible for future legislations to wipe out these societal evils in future. As a result, the words "right to practice religion," as it was originally drafted, was replaced by the freedom of religious worship, which is more narrow. Hansa continued to champion women's rights outside of her participation in the assembly. She attempted to end the stigma surrounding birth control and use of contraception by spreading awareness of its forms to women. In the field of education, she established the Lady Irwin College for Women in Delhi and had the distinction of being the first woman vice chancellor of any Indian university. She also ensured female representation in the Bombay Legislative Council, having won its elections in 1937 and working as its member for 12 years. In conclusion of this part, I will say that many in and out of public life today may discredit or misunderstand those who waded through these testing times of framing the Constitution. We may have different views, but we must remember that while some of their positions and decisions may be considered unfashionable today, these are contributions of those who strove to make our nation a vibrant democracy with equality and liberties for all, which cannot be forgotten or erased from history. Durga Bai Deshmukh, Dakshayani Velayudam, Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, Hansa Mehta, and many others like Annie Maskarana, Sucheta Kriplani, Purnima Banerjee, and Malti Devi Chaudhary, to name a few more, carried the heavy burden of representing a large cross-section of society that had myriad views, whether agreeable to us now or not, and their presence at the drawing board, which is the Constituent Assembly itself, though inadequate, was transformational and disproportionate to the influence that they brought in the constitution making process. Now I come to the third section of the legal profession, women lawyers and judges. When it comes to the history of the legal profession and women's participation, there are many examples. Perhaps the best known is Cornelia Sorabji, who was the first female graduate from Bombay University, the first woman to study law at Oxford University when she graduated in 1882, but was not awarded a degree as women could not register as advocates. She was later called to the bar in Britain in 1892 before enrolling as a barrister in Calcutta, giving her the distinction of not only being the first female advocate in India, but also in Britain. Another absolutely fascinating personality who is perhaps less heard of is Mithan Lan, who became the first woman to be allowed to practice law in the Bombay High Court in 1924. But more than her role at the bar, she left an indelible mark on the female suffragist movement and the fight for gender equality in India. Influenced by Sophia Duleep Singh, an ardent feminist and suffragist in Britain, who she met by chance, she advocated for women's suffrage as being equally important to the fight for independence and challenged notions that they were mutually exclusive. At the young age of 21, she and her mother, Hirabai Tata, were part of the delegation that went to British Parliament to impress upon them to include female suffrage in the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. While they were not immediately successful, it sowed the seeds. Female suffrage was going to be left to the discretion of Indian provinces, which both Bombay and Madras granted as limited franchise in 1921. It was this journey, in fact, that led her to the law. Recollecting what it was like to be the only woman in the Bombay bar, she said, "I felt like a new animal at the zoo, with folks peeping through the doorways. As soon as my shadow crossed from the library to the common room, there would be an uncomfortable silence, making me feel even more self-conscious." Ironically, it was this misogyny itself that apparently gave her first court appearance. Her client wanted his opponent to feel the humiliation of being defeated by a woman. But soon thereafter, she became a formidable name in the profession and played a huge role outside the courtroom, as well as in shaping legislation for marriage and inheritance, and social work in developing infrastructure in slums, helping with the resettlement of partition refugees and other activities of the AIWC. In 1947, she even became India's first female sheriff. It's a very ceremonial office today, but it had some meaning in the presidency towns back then. But before all this, how is it that a woman entered the profession at all? For this, we possibly have Miss Regina Guha and Sudhanshu Bala Hazra to thank for. After completing her MA in 1913 and Bachelor of Law in 1916 from Calcutta, Regina Guha submitted an application to be made a pleader in the District Court of Alipur, ruffling more than just a few feathers. The legal profession was a gentleman's club where women were simply not welcome. Much like other contemporary cases around the world where women were seeking to be considered as persons under the statute governing laws, Regina was the petitioner in India. Her application to be pleader was heard by a special 5-judge bench of the Calcutta High Court, which determined whether the Legal Practitioners Act contemplated women lawyers. Despite relying on General Clauses Act, which states that words importing the masculine gender shall be taken to include the female, her arguments found no favor with the bench. 5 years later, Sudhanshu Bala Hazra, after overcoming many hurdles, similarly submitted an application in Patna High Court. It is said that the courtroom at the time was packed, with the Vakil Association of the High Court staging a protest. Her application too was rejected. A woman, though fully qualified, could not be enrolled under the Legal Practitioners Act, as her gender did not render her to be a person under the Act. With the Sex Disqualification Removal Act in 1919, passed in England, and Cornelia being allowed to be enrolled as an advocate, a focused campaign to amend the Legal Practitioners Act was kick-started in India by Sudhanshu Bala's adoptive father, Madhusudan Das, known as the architect of modern Orissa, and her sister, Saila Bala Das. Interestingly, the common argument for these lawyers fighting to enter the profession was that in a country where the Parda system prevails, they must be allowed to represent these women who otherwise cannot instruct a lawyer of the other gender properly and thus suffer. Finally, in 1923, the Legal Practitioners Women Act was finally passed, removing disqualification of women from the profession. In the judiciary also, we have numerous examples. It took 39 years for the first Supreme Court judge to be appointed from among women, which was Fatima Bibi, Justice Fatima Bibi, making her the first female judge to be a part of the Supreme Court and the first Muslim woman to be appointed to any of the higher judiciaries in the country. To late Justice Leela Seth, who had the distinction of not only being the first female Chief Justice of the High Court, but also being the first woman lawyer to be designated as senior advocate by the Supreme Court. Now I'll come to the main part of this section, which is Anna Chandy. Like this, there are many remarkable lawyers that paved the way. My attention today is focused primarily on Anna Chandy, a fascinating writer, activist, lawyer, and lastly a judge who broke the glass ceiling clearly in many, many ways, but does not quite enjoy the same limelight as others. Perhaps as a result of having been raised by an all-woman family, influenced by matrilineal traditions followed in the Travancore Nair community, Anna Chandy was fiercely feminist in many of her beliefs. She benefited from the push in women's education and literacy at the time in Kerala. As the only woman in her class, she routinely faced humiliating mockery and attracted the ire of her male classmates and professionals. But this did not deter her from graduating with distinction in 1926 as the first woman in Kerala with a law degree. Her journey in the legal profession began in 1929 when she joined the bar and soon rose to fame as an eminent practitioner of criminal law and champion of women's rights through her nuanced writings and arguments. I think many of those writings are now available. Some of them were in Malayalam. They have been translated, and I would urge all of you to read it. She was appointed as the first great Munsif in 1937, making her the first Malayali woman to hold that position. In 1948, she went on to become a district judge, and in 1959, she was India's first female High Court judge and one of the first female judges in the Anglo-Saxon world, next to Emily Murphy. She retired in 1967, but continued to push for social reform as a member of the Kerala Law Commission. She just did not stop at the law. She even dabbled in politics. We must not overlook that women who actually dared to contest elections faced almost insurmountable obstacles. Anna Chandy also was no exception. Contesting in 1931, she faced brutal mudslinging, and when she lost the elections, the Malayala Rajyam, the leading newspaper, wrote an editorial full of unadulterated sexism. However, she was later elected in 1932 prior to being appointed as Munsif. As a judge, she passed numerous important judgments which reflected an extensive understanding of the law, with unwavering emphasis on the dignity of the individuals and the right of the accused. Her forte was undoubtedly criminal law, over which she had a brilliant grasp. However, her judgments spanned a wide range of subject areas, including company law, prevention of food adulteration, etc. These judgments reflect her impressive ability to critically analyze diverse areas of law and articulate lucidly by relying strongly on logic. When it came to criminal law, her conclusions were always grounded on the high threshold for evidence, and she was unswayed by the seriousness or heinousness of the nature of the crime. She strived to balance the principles of natural justice with the need to prosecute and punish criminal offenders and place the burden of proof squarely on the prosecution. Woefully aware of the lack of proper representation and dismal conditions faced by accused in our system and society, she consistently respected the rights of the accused and ensured that their protection was given in a fair trial. In one case, rebuking the sessions judges for appointing inexperienced lawyers to defend those accused facing capital penalty, she noted that the system was such that the accused are overwhelmingly underprivileged and they deserved not just a right to counsel but to a competent one. She went so far as to hold that if an accused unfortunately had an inexperienced counsel, it was the court's primary duty to come to the aid of the accused by putting timely and useful questions and warning the advocates from treading dangerous grounds. This you find in the Supreme Court's judgments in the 90s. And if I'm not wrong, one of the early judgments of Justice Bhagwati, 1985, on the importance of legal aid and competent legal aid in 1985. I think that's Sukhdev or something like that. For instance, in another case, she held that the mere act of fleeing or absconding in itself cannot be a sign of guilt. Perhaps the most impressive was Anna Chandy's passionate and powerful articulation of women's rights, both in her advocacy and writing. She had strong views that were more often than not met with shock and outrage. Her autobiography, she wrote a periodical Srimati where she regularly campaigned for women's status as a distinct group and expressed her extremely nuanced and well-argued views about women's role in society, within the domestic realm and outside it. Her autobiography was later serialized in the Malayalam Manorama in 1971 and published under the title of Atmakatha in 1973, which remains a treasure trove for understanding her contribution. On women's reservations, in a marked difference from Constituent Assembly like members like Amrit Kaur or Dakshayani, in the public arena, Anna Chandy argued for women's status as a distinct group and actively campaigned for special measures almost 2 decades before it was written into our constitution. In 1932, she was arguing for proportional reservation for women in government jobs and demanding the status of a depressed community for them. Women members of legislatures and women's deputations were making frequent requests for fair representation in public bodies and service. But this was not universally supported. In fact, she faced severe backlash from the women themselves, but she always stood steadfast in her positions. Her understanding of equality based on the twin concepts of autonomy and dignity was far ahead of her times, given that it was only expressed by our Supreme Court 75 years later. When she actually advocated for birth control through self-control in the 1920s, she went on to make a resolution to the AIWC meeting in Trivandrum in 1935, asking the government to establish birth control clinics throughout the country, disseminate information, etc. Her advocacy was pioneering in those times, as it was based on a feminist conception of women's control over their own bodies. She challenged the notion that women's bodies existed solely for men's pleasure and argued against provisions in the Kerala Civil Procedure Code that denied women their agency. Much later, in a dissent note as a member of the 42nd Law Commission, she argued that a woman must be equally made culpable for engaging in adultery, which was punishable till it was struck down, that is Section 497. However, while she argued for equal culpability, she did not urge decriminalization of the act, for she believed that society at large had an interest in securing the institution of family, which was also evident from her insistence that the right to abort was a limited one. Strangely, here was a pioneering female voice who both advocated a pro-choice approach to women's autonomy, but only to the extent of contraception and not when a fetus was involved, wherein it turned to be pro-life approach given her deeply religious upbringing. Regardless, it is important to remember that for her to have these ideas and campaign for them in the first half of the 20th century was a feat in itself. There is some more, but I think I'm running out of time. So I'll end this section on Anna Chandy by saying that what is compelling about her is that she was a trailblazer like none other, because not only did she write prolifically on these contentious topics unwaveringly, but she adopted this rights-based approach even in her role as an advocate and as a judge. Every position she took expressed this vision of equality and dignity for women, procedural justice, and protection of the accused, importance of a fair trial, etc. The full magnitude of her brilliance was perhaps not even understood back then. Her convictions were astoundingly brave, and it is really such a shame that we don't quite talk quite as much about her in our mainstream discussions of Indian legal history. She's perhaps she could perhaps justly called as one of the forgotten stars. In conclusion, I would say this, that these women came from different backgrounds, regions, etc. But they all felt strongly for the values of equality and that all demographics have an equal role in the building of a new India. All shared a common vision that the goal of equality is critical for the realization of our freedoms, and that there can be no true democracy without the fullest participation by women in every sphere of activity that men were engaged in. Each of them shared the vision of all other members of the Constituent Assembly, that the Constitution spoke for and was for the people who are its ultimate guardians. That adult universal franchise, a long cherished goal, had to be guaranteed, and that the nature of the state had to be to alleviate millennia old repression and exploitation of large segments of society. Gaining, as the Assembly did from the lived experience in other democracies, specific safeguards against discriminatory practices, be they grounded on caste, place of birth or residence or gender, race or religion, was guaranteed, and also guaranteed in relation to public employment. The specific provision with respect to making women and children specific provision promoting laws or policies in favor of women or children or protective policies was meant to ensure women empowerment. These pioneering women had the foresight and vision to peer into the mists of the future and to create structures which gave to what has shaped out to be our today, which hopefully will open up to an even better tomorrow and hereafter. I would end this talk with the sobering reflection that it is our duty to go back and learn from the inspiring lives of these women who gave up so much and overcame so many multiple barriers to gain our country freedom and to ensure future generations a better, safer, and prosperous society with no expectations for themselves. To work and build upon their ideas and live up to their goals would be the best tribute that we can strive to give them. I would again thank the many lawyers, scholars, and my dear friends who are all actively working to research and write on these remarkable women. I benefited greatly from their research, and also especially thank my 3 law researchers, all of whom are here, who put together this speech. Without them, I could not have. Some of the ideas were mine, but the effort and enterprise and the sweat was theirs. So once again, I thank you for patiently listening to me. It's been a real delight.
Those 3 names, I think maybe better people should know. Those
Thank you.
who got so high.
Yes.
We are so grateful, my lord. Surely we'll give the name. Adishi will request us to give the names. We are so grateful, my lord. I think starting from the great Durga Bhai, Rajkumari, Hansa Mehta, Anna Chandy, and our own SHYAMLHA PAPPU, I think we always used to discuss about this social justice concept and starting from Durga Bhai till Shyamla Pappu, I think everybody talked of this, that if the state is to take responsibility, it's most important. If you actually wish to shiver, if after 75 years of independence, we feel and we know a sad state that more than 50% of women in India are anemic. So that is what we used to discuss with Shyamla, ki as real justice would come when we know कि हर एक घर में दिया भी जले अनाज भी हो, अगर ना हो कहीं ऐसा तो ऐतराज भी हो, रहेगी कब तलक वादों में कैद खुशहाली, हर एक बार ही कल क्यों कभी तो आज भी हो, वो आज कब होगा. This is, I think, very challenging. We also acknowledge young Divyang and Riya. They are doing a lot of work for our legal system, and thank you Divyang and Riya being here. I now request audience, if there is any question, couple of questions we can take for Justice Bhatt if you have, or otherwise we'll proceed. Any question if you wish to ask? Adish ji, naam kya rate तीनों का? And if you have any questions, we can have. Otherwise, I request Ranjana ji to. Yeah?
They are not Indians, but they are lawyers.
Oh,
They are
Acha.
working with me as my researcher.
Yeah, researcher.
Acha, these three names. Veda Singh, huh? Veda Singh, Shaloka Raha, and Ishan Sharma. Are they here? Just stand up. I mean, just stand up. You have done such good work and acknowledge. Hey, वहीं पे चाहे खड़े हो जाए. Veda Singh. Good. You belong to Justice Ravindra Bhatt's chamber, so you work more and shy of being acknowledged, so it is in your system now. चलो क्या बार क्या करना? अरे बाबा. Ranjana ji, now I request Ranjana ji now. In fact, Ranjana ji हमारी main speaker होती हैं सब जगह. असली स्टार तो ये come and say, master of ceremonies, all in one. आइए Ranjana ji, please say a few words about the foundation, and Krishna, you can help her.
Thank you, Ashoka Roraji. Honorable Mr. Justice S. Ravindra Bhatt, Mr. K.K. Rai, Mr. R. Krishnamurthy, Ms. Neera Bhayog, Mr. Arora, all the distinguished members who are sitting here in the audience, my colleagues at the bar, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the trustees and advisory board members of the Shyamla Pappu Law Foundation, and on this occasion of this most memorable first Shyamla Pappu lecture by a very eminent speaker, Honorable Justice Ravindra Bhatt, on trailblazing women in law, I may mention here that this has been one of the most constructive, insightful, and inspiring addresses that we have heard for a long time. And therefore, I'm reminded, after hearing Justice Bhatt, of the corpus of wisdom contained in the ethical formulations of the Dharma Shastras and the metaphysical contents of the Upanishads, where Dhira means the wise one and indicates a combination of courage and perseverance, perhaps best exemplified in the personality of late Dr. Shyamla Pappu, who was a shining meteor in the legal firmament of her times, inspiring generations of young lawyers in the years to come. Her life bore the imprint of her unwavering belief in herself, her pursuit of excellence, her deep commitment to law, her dedication, and her espousal of social causes. I knew Shyamla ji on a personal level, and as Justice Bhatt said, we shared a common interest in music. And I think that also brought a great degree of sensitivity to all the causes that she espoused. The foundation was founded in the year 2017 under the able guidance of Shri K.K. Venugopal, Attorney General for India, in memory of late Dr. Shyamla Pappu, Padma Shri awardee, the first woman to be designated as a senior advocate in the entire Commonwealth, and who was a member of the Law Commission of India. In recognition of the functional significance of law in fulfilling the legal, socio-economic needs of society, the legal team of the foundation has been providing free legal aid through mobile vans to the needy and downtrodden sections of society in the remote and most backward neighboring villages of Delhi. During the past 2 years, legal awareness camps have been conducted in Mayur Vihar, Sarup Nagar, Samarpur Patli, Malaswa, Burari, etc. At these camps, eminent advocates, Rita Kumar, who has worked in the office of late Dr. Shyamla Pappu, Subra Mehendiratta, senior advocate, Sapna Acharya, President Vikas Mihla Sangam, Dr. S. Ravindran, expert member, AP State Biodiversity Board, Vijay Lakshmi, member in charge of the All India Women's Conference Working Women's Hostel, have given their legal services to the women and to the other downtrodden sections of society. Apart from legal awareness, the team led by Dr. Sukumar H. Mehta, senior consultant, cardiothoracic surgeon, Sterling Hospitals, Ahmedabad, for the last 1 year during the COVID-19 pandemic, has also been promoting awareness in people to keep their surroundings clean in line with the Swachh Bharat mission of the Government of India. The team of workers from the foundation have also distributed food and clothes to the migrant labor who were leaving Delhi during the COVID-19 lockdown in the year 2020. Apart from the above, the team of workers led by Gagandeep Kaur have been providing education, especially to beggars and unprivileged sections of society, as also to orphan adolescents, and have been giving them proper guidance so that the destitute pupils can complete at least the basic education to survive in this era. Further, the foundation workers have been spreading awareness amongst children by organizing campaigns in slum areas so that children in these zones stop begging on the streets or around shopping areas. The foundation also provides certain other skills to students to develop their career, which might be beneficial for their future. It is now a pleasant task to call upon the legal awareness team to kindly come forward. Okay, may I call upon Subra Mehendiratta, Swapna Acharya, and Vijay Lakshmi. And may I ask to facilitate the Honorable Justice Ravindra Bhatji.
Right, sir?
Sorry.
ओ अरे आप तो रह ही गए नहीं 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 हाँ हाँ सॉरी 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 माय मिस्टेक
रेडी हमें
I now hand over the mic to Ashok Arora. Thank you.
Okay.
May I request Honorable Shri Rathi ji to say a few words, please.
Good evening, my lord. Good evening, all the dignitaries on the dais. Good evening, friends. I just couldn't resist myself sharing one of the, I'll say, very important contribution of my Lord Justice Bhat in development of the criminal jurisprudence. My Lord headed the bench in Delhi High Court, Lordship. It was as we known as Jessica Lal murder case, Lordship. Manu Vashist versus State. And some witnesses had turned hostile, and Lordship had then directed that why India doesn't have a witness protection law. So I was serving as officer on special duty with Delhi State Legal Service Authorities. It was in 2014 perhaps, Lordship. And under my Lord's guidance and direction, India's first Delhi Witness Protection Law 2015 was drafted by Government of NCT of Delhi, Lordship. It is working, Lordship. And Lordship, it has now grown into a full tree. Then I went back to my judicial work. Then I joined Justice Gogoi's team as Director of National Legal Services Authority, Lordship. And then there was a judicial order passed by Honorable Supreme Court as to why we don't have a pan-India witness protection law. And then whenever anybody used to do Google, we used to get only one witness protection scheme that was in Delhi, inspired by my Lord. And then I was called by Mr. Rajiv Gaba, who used to be Home Secretary. He's now Cabinet Secretary. And then he said, Mr. Rathi, you were leading the team which developed the Delhi law. We need a law for the whole country. And we then developed this NALSA Witness Protection Law 2018, which is now pan-Indian lordship, and which is being quoted almost in every third or fourth criminal appeal which Honorable Supreme Court is dealing, lordship. So it is only because of my Lord's pioneer vision that we could achieve that, lordship. I just wanted to share this. Thank you.
Thank you, Rathi sir, for enlightening us on this important issue. May I now request Honorable Ms. Neera Maryog to say a few words.
A very good evening to all the dignitaries and justice and all the persons who are sitting over here. I wasn't prepared to deliver any speech or lecture, but what I can say is that women empowerment doesn't mean only acknowledgement of women that they're empowered by male society, but also by females. And the little change which we can bring to the society is that if we realize that we are also a part of the system, and if at our homes and in our daily lives, we can give equal respect to all the females who happen to visit our office or workplace or our home. Or for that matter, if we as mother-in-law, for the time being, my son is not married, but if we as mother-in-law, I'm sorry, if we as mother-in-laws can treat our daughter and daughter-in-law alike, and if our daughters-in-law can treat their mother and mothers-in-law alike, probably women empowerment will begin from our home. And it is easier to condemn the system. But I think if we start working at a grassroots level, beginning from the maid who works at a house, probably we will make a difference. This is a very important aspect of women empowerment, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Neera ma'am, for reminding us, and I fully endorse, and even Shyamla ji, when we used to discuss, I mean, something which immediately comes to my mind, she would always say कि जब बेटी family way में होती है तो माँ खूब ध्यान रखती है उसका कि ये नहीं करना वो नहीं करना, और जब daughter in law होती है तो कहती तुम अकेली नहीं हुई हो pregnant, तो ये बहुत अच्छी बात आपने वो अपनी माँ के पास जाती है तो ये बड़ा अच्छा एक्सपेक्ट है. In fact, I'll share my article on this where I say women is the stronger sex. on this Women Day I wrote, and I'll share with all of you. And I fully agree with you that it is the women responsible. If female feticide में किसकी responsibility है? Firstly, the women who is going for that. Secondly, mother-in-law. I mean, these are all responsible. Women is responsible. 498 में कौन होता है? Mother-in-law is most of the time there, and most of the time she is responsible. So these are the questions which I think वो खुद ही को कर बुलंद इतना I always share with women when I talked about this, that how you carry yourself. Now three women we saw, they are doing so much good work. तो खुद ही को बुलंद जो है वही है. Before I invite Krishna Baba, I cannot resist. I am not a great singer as Shyamla was, but I think no meeting, no discussion about Shyamla can conclude unless we say this. तुम ही सोचो जरा क्यों न रोके तुम्हें, जान जाती है जब उठ के जाते हो तुम, जान जाती है जब उठ के जाते हो तुमको अपनी कसम जान जा, ऐसी बातें किया ना करो, आज जाने की जिद ना करो. श्यामला जी को हम कभी नहीं जाने देते थे कि लास्ट तो यही होगा. हम उनसे सुनते रहते थे पूरी महफिल में और कहते थे वो गाऊं आज जाने की, कहते नहीं अभी नहीं कहते क्यों, तो हम कहते थे वो तो रिजर्व किया हुआ लास्ट के लिए. और लास्ट में श्यामला यही गाती थी. हमें आज भी आई मीन वी आर very happy to talk about her. I always say, I mean what Anand says कि आनंद मरा नहीं करते, आनंद मरा नहीं है. Shyamla would always remain with us, is always with us. वो हमारे लिए सबके लिए गाती रहती हैं आज जाने की जिद ना करो. So I'll invite Baba now to convey a vote of thanks. Krishna.
Friends, before I propose the formal vote, I would request Vijay Lakshmi to kindly facilitate Adish Agarwal ji.
First lady का भी कोई रोल.
My Lord Justice Bhatt, Rai Sahab, I think Rai Sahab I have known as a child, and Ranjana ji, Ashok ji, and Dr. Rathi Sahab, Dr. Neera Bharyo. The today's lecture of Justice Bhatt has taken me down memory lane, and I am reminded of my childhood days where my colleague, my friends, and in the child were not my students, but doyens of the bar like Justice D.A. Desai, Justice M.P. Thakkar, and I think Rai Sahab would bear me out on this. Our house you have seen, and Justice V.R. Krishnaiah, and yes, Venkatramaya, of course. I think he was a great judge in whose time I think we had the first woman Supreme Court judge, Justice Fatima Bibi. And now in 2027, that the daughter of that great judge is going to be the first woman Chief Justice of India. And later in the profession, I had gained my experience from our P.P. Rao, G.L. Sanghi, Arun Jaitley, Amrinder Saranji, S.K. Dalokia ji. And one thing, I think there are several young members of the bar here. One thing which all my seniors, all my benefactors had told me was, you must remember the courtroom is a class, and be a vacuum cleaner in the courtroom, and what you imbibe in the courtroom is the knowledge which an advocate has researched over 5-6 years, 5-6 days or 15 days, and you get that in 1 hour. And this is my this is to all the young members of the bar, to, whenever you are waiting for a case, see what you gain from the arguments of the counsel who are arguing before you and after you. And with these words, I would thank Justice Bhatt for a very elaborate lecture, and also Ranjana ji and Rai Sahab and Ashok Arora ji, Neera Bharyog ji and Rathi Sahab to grace this occasion, and all my members of the bar and young members of the bar. Thank you all. Well, there is tea and snacks. All the guests must have to take the tea and snacks and then leave only.